On this side of the cassette, you will hear Dr. Howard C. Estep deliver the 6th Bible study lecture from the book of Daniel. Our Bible teacher, Dr. Estep, is now beginning this study session with Daniel chapter 6.
Open your Bibles to the book of Daniel chapter 6. We have a lesson outlined for you. 1, Daniel prospered under the reign of the Medes and the Persians. That's verses 1 through 3. This man Daniel, who is now about probably 80, 90 years of age, he's prospering under the reign or the government of the Medes and the Persians, verses 1 through 3. 2, ancient politicians, and this is so true. Ancient politicians plan Daniel's downfall, verses 4 through 5. 3, the politicians' plan. What is it? Verses 6 through 9. 4, Daniel stands his ground. He remains firm. Daniel stands his ground. Verses 10 through 13. 5, the king's efforts and Daniel's life in jeopardy. Verses 14 through 17. And 6, Daniel's deliverance. And this is beautiful when we come to that part of it. Daniel's deliverance, verses 18 through 22. And lastly, the last part is Daniel's enemies destroyed and the king changes his mind. Verses 23 through 28. So if you turn now to Daniel 6, verses 1 through 3, beginning in verse 1, we'll see how Daniel was prospering under the reign of the Medes and the Persians. Verse 1, it pleased Darius, made the king happy. Darius, it pleased him. He's king of Persia. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. So he's designating 120 key politicians to help him rule. If you remember, the Medes and the Persians took over from the Babylonian Empire on the night of Belshazzar's feast. And in the great image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, he saw an image that had a head of gold, and then it had 2 arms. The arms were silver. The arms were representative of the Medes and the Persians. So it pleased Darius of the Persians to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents. Over the 120, there would be 3 men over them, or in control of them. 3 presidents, verse 2, of whom Daniel was first. Daniel was the king's first choice among these 3 men who would be in charge or form a board, a controlling board, governing board over the 120. Daniel was number 1, according to verse 2, that the princes might give accounts unto them, unto the 3, and the king should have no damage. In other words, the king is getting rid of the responsibility. These 3 presidents, Daniel's one of them, and the other 2, they're going to govern the whole kingdom. And the king doesn't have too much to worry about. And the 3 princes, or correction, the 3 presidents will report to the king. Verse 3, then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes. This Daniel was a man who had stuck to his guns all of these years, from a teenager in Jerusalem or in Judah, and in the 80 years, in the 70 years that he had been a captive in Babylon, he had maintained his gospel or his religious testimony. You know, that's a long time in a foreign land to maintain your testimony for God. But he had done this under all circumstances. And verse 3 says, this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him. He always had a nice spirit. You know, it's lovely when you're in a place working, or you have people employed with you, or people are associated with you in the work, or you are in charge of a department, as some of you have been or are now. It's nice to have certain people that you can always talk to or speak to, or you give them an order, or you give them a suggestion, or you make a suggestion to them, and they're always pleasant, responsive, and they never give you they never rub you the wrong way. It's just delightful to have that kind of people, be associated with them. And evidently Daniel was one of those. He just didn't rub them the wrong way, according to verse 3. Why? Middle of the verse 3. Because an excellent spirit was in him. An excellent spirit was in him. And this gives the reason for the exaltation of Daniel over the others, which caused the jealousy. Now we see the sin of jealousy coming in. And jealousy is a dangerous thing. It's vicious. It's much like a loaded gun or a bomb that has been set to explode, and you don't know when it's going to go off. So here is 120 politicians. They're going to rule the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. So the king has searched out over his domain, and he's found 3 men that he's going to put in charge of the 120. One of these 3 is an unusually bright, intelligent man named Daniel. And the other 2 presidents, plus their friends and people that they influence, are jealous of Daniel. Very jealous. Why? Because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. In other words, the king was willing to put Daniel in charge of everything. And so this made the others jealous. If we could ever get rid of jealousy in all of our lives, it would sure help. It would change us. So often, people are so jealous because if you ask somebody else to do something, then they wonder, how come he didn't ask me? I can do better than the one he asked. And after all, I'm a little bit closer to him than the others. This jealousy, it's a peculiar thing. It's like a potato that you put in a little cup of water. Pretty soon it starts to grow, and then you got to tie it up to the curtains, and pretty soon it's all over the house. You ever take a sweet potato and watch it grow? Put it in a little bit of water. It grows everywhere, Never grows any potatoes, but it grows a lot of vines. It's much like jealousy. So Daniel prospered under the Medes and the Persians, and now Daniel has been put in a very precarious situation, because he's been a captive in Babylon for 70 years. Now at the end of the 70 years, the Medes and the Persians take over, and now he's in worse shape than he was before. So we're going to see what happens. Ancient politicians, our second point, planned Daniel's downfall. And if you could go to Sacramento tonight, or to any number of capitals of our 50 states across the country, or to Washington, and if you could meet with little exclusive, secluded groups, you would find these politicians planning to do certain things so they can squeeze out other factions in the realm of politics. And we go way back to the reign of the Medes and the Persians, and we find those ancient politicians doing the very thing that people do today. Verse 4, then the presidents, or the other 2 presidents. Daniel was number 1. Then the other 2 presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. They're jealous of him. They don't want him to be pushed ahead. After all, he's a Jew. We're Persians. We're of the marvelous kingdom of Persia. This fellow's a Jew. He's been a prisoner of war for these 70 years. How come he gets elevated? If anybody should be taking orders from us, it should be he should be taking from us, and us not taking orders from him or even associating with him on an equal level. So verse 4 says, they began to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. Well, how are they going to do it? Well, first of all, when enemies cannot find fault at all in a man, he must be perfect. If you want to find out how bad you are, have your enemies criticize you. Oh, can they tear you apart? Oh yeah, you're conceited. You're stuck up. You think you're it. You're the only one that can do what you're doing. You ever have your enemies get mad at you and tell you off? You never realize you had so much wrong with you in all of your life. Well, same thing again. So they're trying to find fault with him in the middle of verse 4. But they could not find none occasion or fault. Now, if your enemies can't find anything wrong with you, naturally your friends will think you're just some pumpkin. You're really it. You're honey smothered in brown sugar. You really are. If your enemies can't find any fault, you've got to be really good. So they couldn't find any fault. What are they going to do? Well, they're not going to let him get away with it. Middle of verse 4. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. A model man, uprooted when he was a teenager from Jerusalem, taken east to Babylonia. And he's been away from his family and the culture in which he was raised as a young lad for over 70 years. And he put his mind and his heart to the job that was assigned to him. And they couldn't find any fault, no error. He was faithful. Everything about him was super colossal. What are they going to do? Well, they got to dig up something. They'll find it. Your enemies will find something to come up with. They'll say, oh, well, his feet point out. Or he's pigeon-toed. They'll find something wrong with you. The enemies, you just leave it alone. They'll find something. Or he chews his food too loud. I heard an enemy saying about a certain person, he smacks his lips all the time. Well, so what? Verse 5, then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel. They surveyed these two presidents and some of their buddies. They surveyed the situation. They said, well, we can't find anything wrong with this fella. He does his governmental responsibilities exactly as he should. In fact, he's the best in the kingdom. How are we going to get him? Middle of verse 5. Except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. We'll pick on his religion. Because they were pagan worshipers. They worshiped sun gods. They worshiped the god of Baal, the goddess of the sun. But this man Daniel worshiped a supreme being because he had demonstrated on a number of occasions, beginning in chapter 2, right on through chapter 5, he had demonstrated that his God, his supernatural God up in heaven, had the power to deliver when the gods of Babylon could not deliver. And the Medes and the Persian rulers had gotten word of this. The news had spread around, so they said, now, we'll get him on his religion. We'll just observe him because it was evident and it must have been known among the higher bracket of the rulers and the governors and princes and so forth of the Medes and Persian kingdom that this man was an extra super religious man. So we'll watch him religiously. And I'll just believe that he'll be doing something wrong. We'll catch him. Okay. The politician's plan is in verses 6 through 9, and we're going to see what they're going to do. Verse 6, then these presidents, and that's just the two of them, because Daniel was number one, and there were only three of them, so there's only two of them left, the two presidents. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king. They had a special audience with the king, and they said thus unto him, King Darius, King Darius, live forever. Now that's just a greeting. It doesn't mean that because he's going to die like everybody else. King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, and the princes, the counselors, and the captains, and all of the sheriffs the chief of police and the tax assessor and all of them, O king, I just threw that in, it's my own translation, have consulted together to establish a royal statue. We've all gotten together, probably down at Denny's or somewhere like that. We gotten together and we've come up with a new set of laws. We think we've come up with something that'll just be beneficial for your kingdom. And oh, king, this will help you to rule this nation like it's never been ruled in the history of mankind. We're doing this to help you. We love you. Oh, king, live forever. These boys are tricky. Oh, when they come up, with their hands stuck out. You ever notice how people shake hands? They're not only shaking hands, but they're looking for a handout. These boys came up with this way, I'm sure. And what did they say? They said, we've gotten together and we believe that we're going to help you to establish a royal statue and to make a firm decree. We believe that what we have to suggest that you'll pass a law. And when you pass this law, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to have far-reaching effects in the middle of verse 7, that whosoever shall ask a petition of any God, or any man, I threw in the word any, for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. What they're doing, they're making the king feel important. They're saying to this handsome king, Darius of the Persian Empire, listen, if anybody in your kingdom for 30 days worships or prays or asks a petition or in any way acknowledges any other God other than you for 30 days, making him feel good, they're saying to him, you are the greatest, like Muhammad Ali. I'm the greatest. They're saying to this boy, you're the greatest. So what's going to happen? Well, it's rather interesting. They had thought this thing out. That whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Oh, sounds kind of bad. Going to throw whoever does that into a den of lions. Now that's rather strange why he would do that. And then they say in verse 8, O king, establish the decree and sign the writings, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Because under the law of the Medes and the Persians, once you signed a law or made a law, it could not be changed or altered. Even the king himself was subject to that law. And so they knew if they could placate the king and butter him up and give him a big ego trip and make him think that he was somebody, and anybody who did something contrary to acknowledging any other God except him, that they'd be tossed into the lion's den for 30 days. They knew if they could get that on the paper, get it on the books, on the statute books, that they would have something that would be concrete. And even the king couldn't change it. He would be subject to it. What does it say? Which altereth not, the latter part of verse 8, which altereth not, couldn't be changed. That's it. Verse 9, wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. The king fell for it. Isn't that amazing? Brilliant, intelligent monarch. He had to be smart to be head of the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. He fell for that line of baloney. People like to be flattered. And usually when people start flattering you, and buttering you up and telling you a lot of things that deep down in your soul aren't right, there's a motive behind it somewhere. They want to borrow the car for the weekend, or your boat, or your motor home, or maybe you could come over and sit with their dog while they're gone for the weekend. When they approach you with some of that kind of stuff. So they buttered him up, and the king fell for it. Wherefore King Darius signed the writings and the decree. Made it law. That's it. Didn't have to go before the committee and go into the subcommittee and come out of the committee and go into the into the chamber and be voted on. The king just got out his old ballpoint pen and wrote it out and said, that's it. There it is. I sign it. Anybody that acknowledges any other king for 30 days other than me, I'm going to put him in the lion's den. What's going to happen? Daniel is in trouble. Our fourth part, Daniel stands his ground. Because these presidents, these two sneaky presidents, they have been slipping around watching Daniel. They know what his practices are, what his customs are. And they had this all arranged. They had a motive. They were jealous of him. He was too smart, too wise, too intelligent. And they thought, we'll get him out of the way. And eventually, someday, who knows, we might be king. So what's going to happen? Verses 10 through 13. We'll see what happens. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, and this shows the boldness and the faith of Daniel. He knew the writing had been signed. He heard about it. He read it on the bulletin board. The heralders came through the kingdom blowing the horn, and somebody read the decree so everybody would know it. That was the evening 6 o'clock news. So what's he going to do? All right. Verse 10. When Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem. What's his custom? 3 times a day. A Jew, when he's out of the country, is customarily inclined to always pray facing Jerusalem. Muslims pray facing Mecca. Daniel prays toward Jerusalem. So he goes into his house, verse 10, and his windows being open in his chamber or in his room toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees. He humbled himself before God, got down upon his knees 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. Muslims pray 5 times a day, Jews 3 times. 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime, as he was in the custom of doing. Now, I don't know whether we would do that or not. If someone had passed some kind of a law or a decree, and we were notified that if we had a service in this room, if anybody came to the service here on a Friday night to the Bible class, and they met in this room, that they would be arrested and they would be sent to a concentration camp for 25 years, I don't think we'd have a single person show up tonight. I don't think we'd even open the gates so anybody could get in. If there had been a law passed this week, said anybody that goes to the Friday night Bible class at the King is Coming Auditorium in Colton, California, if they go in the property and into the building and participate in the Bible class by sitting in the seats provided and be a part of the congregation, any and all who do that are subject to arrest and confinement to a concentration camp for 25 years. I don't think anybody would come. But you see, there's such a thing as, for Christians, the law of God supersedes the law of man. And some of us living at this hour may be faced in the days ahead of us when we will have to manifest our prerogative and stand firm for God over the laws of man. Very possible. Daniel is very good proof. So he goes into his bedroom, gets down on his knees 3 times a day. The windows open, prays toward Jerusalem, as he's in the habit of doing. The latter part of verse 10, as he did aforetime. So no new law could make Daniel quit praying to the God he had served so faithfully for 80, maybe 90 years. Because when he went to Babylon, he was a teenager. Then he was there for 70 years. 70 years plus his teenage age would make him almost 90 years of age. In the habit of doing that. So passing a new law didn't mean anything to him. He did what he had been doing all the time. Verse 11, then these men, that's the two presidents and the princes and the governors, these people who are angry against Daniel, these men, verse 11, assembled, and they found Daniel praying and making supplications before his God. So he just praying like he always prayed. Verse 12, then they came near. They got a little closer. Let's come up here, fellas. Let's get closer. And they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. After they heard him, then they went back to the king, and they said to the king, guess what? Guess what? Hast thou not signed a decree, the middle of verse 12, that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save or except of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Didn't you sign a petition? Didn't you make a decree? Haven't you passed a law to that effect? And the king answered and said, the thing is true. Yes, sure, I remember. According to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not, and it can't be changed. The king is confirming that he did it, and he himself can't change the law. Verse 13. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, verse 13, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. This fellow Daniel, he's well known in the kingdom. He's well known. You know what he's doing? Why, he's praying 3 times a day just like he always did. He doesn't respect you. Why, O king, live forever. This Daniel, he's terrible. Making these petitions 3 times a day. What's the king going to do? Well, it's rather interesting. The king is really getting backed up in the corner. You thought Daniel was backed up in the corner. Now the king's getting backed up in the corner. We're going to look at the king's efforts, and Daniel's life is in jeopardy. In verses 14 through 17, then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, or very displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. The king realized he had made a mistake. The moment these men came to his palace or into his court or into his living quarters, wherever they met with him, the moment they told him about Daniel praying 3 times a day, the king knew that he was a victim of trickery. These stinkers had done this and used him to get rid of Daniel. And he's sore displeased. And he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. He spent the rest of the day in his legal office with his wise, intelligent advisors, trying to find out, how can I get out of this? But he couldn't. And the reason he couldn't, because the law of the Medes and the Persians say that once a monarch passes a law, even the monarch becomes subject to that law. And that law can't be changed. So he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Verse 15. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, and they're going to remind him now, you're backed up in the corner and you can't change. Even you can't change. No sirree, the latter part of verse 15. O king, that the law of the Medes and the Persians is, and here it is, that no decree or statute which the king establisheth may be changed. You can't change the law. That's it. Verse 16, then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now, the king at this point can't do anything else, because the law says if he pays homage to any other god other than King Darius, he's got to go into the lion's den. He spent all afternoon trying to find out if he could get rid of the law, or could supersede the law, or could change the law, or disobey the law, or null or void the law. And his advisor says it can't be done. And even the enemies of Daniel came and they said, listen, king, you know what the law says. You can't change it. In verse 16, he had the people bring Daniel, throw him into the lion's den. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, and I like this, this is lovely. As Daniel was being thrown into the lion's den, the king said to Daniel, because Daniel's a 90-year-old man. And the king spake and said unto Daniel, middle of verse 16, thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. Faith. Even this pagan king shows a little spark of faith. I remember one time in our home we were getting supper and we were supposed to be starting the fire, and we used our last match. And we lived out in the country and we didn't have any matches. And we used our last match. And it didn't catch. And Mother says, that's the last match, it didn't catch. And I remember she took the stove lifter, if you know what I'm talking about, and hooked it in the lid of the old-fashioned stove. And I looked down in there and I could see just a little spark. And I began to... and I fanned a little spark of fire, and it caught a fire. And we saved the day. Well, here's a little spark of faith in this pagan king's heart. Because as Daniel goes into the lion's den, he says, I know that the God whom you serve can deliver you. And then he actually put it more objectively. He said, will deliver you. Absolutely positive. Now here's a beautiful similarity with the resurrection in verse 17. When they put Daniel in the lion's den, what did they do? Verse 17, and a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den. Why? So he couldn't get out. They brought a stone, evidently a heavy stone. Whether they rolled it, what was the shape of the mouth of the lion's den, we don't know. But they did bring a stone and they put it at the entrance to the den. So Daniel can't get out. And that's what they did when Christ was buried in the tomb in Jerusalem. They rolled a stone in front of the door so he couldn't get out. But when you believe in the supernatural, when you believe that there is a power higher and operating higher, more efficiently than the lower power, you have a faith that even the world can't understand. And as they rolled the stone in front of the tomb in Jerusalem, they had to remove the stone, not to let Christ out, but to let people look in. So they rolled the stone in front of the door, verse 17, and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet. He put his own official signet on the stone, and the Romans did the same with the stone they put on the tomb of Christ in Jerusalem, and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. We don't want to let anybody get him out. No trickery. Nobody can get Daniel out. The law says he's got to go into the lion's den. We've thrown him into the lion's den. That's it. But that isn't it. When man can't do anything else, then God begins to work. Always. God doesn't undertake as long as we can do something. As long as we have the ability to do something, like the men gathered in a prayer meeting and they're saying, "Oh God," and they were referring to to a home where they kept orphan children. And these businessmen are having a prayer meeting and they're praying and they're saying, "Oh God, send these children some shoes." God isn't going to send shoes down from heaven to a group of orphan children in a home. As long as these businessmen have the money on their books or in their pockets to go buy the shoes and give them to the orphans themselves. God never does what we can do for ourselves. God only works when man can no longer achieve anything. So God is going to get the glory here. Then the king. This is Daniel's deliverance beginning in verse 18. Then the king went to his palace. He threw Daniel in. The thing is sealed up. That's it. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. He was nervous. And what did he do? So the king fasted all night long. And neither were instruments of music brought before him. So he wouldn't listen to any music. He wouldn't eat anything. And I'm imagining the chef prepared a lovely tray of delicacies, and he brought them in, and the king said, "Get out of here. I'm not a bit hungry." Well, let's take in Sammy Kaye and Swing and Sway with Sammy Kaye. Well, he wasn't interested in Sammy Kaye or Guy Lombardo, none of that stuff. He wasn't interested in that. No music, neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. He couldn't sleep. No food, no music. Wasn't thirsty, nervous, upset, couldn't sleep. Alka-Seltzer wouldn't even help him. Even if he had had a bottle of Geritol, that wouldn't have done him a bit of good. He was upset. He knew down in his heart that he had sinned against Almighty God. And the blood of an innocent man was going to be on his hands. Verse 19, then the king arose very early in the morning. He didn't have to set his clock. He was up early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. I can see him before he dressed. He just slipped on his robe and he had his house shoes on. And he's flying out across the field going over to the den. And probably some of his subjects right behind him, trying to help him out. He's chasing over to the lion's den. And when he came in verse 20 to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. He was choked with emotion. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God. Oh, not a sun god, not the god of Baal of the Babylonians, not the god of some fictitious mythological individual or being, but the God of the living God, whom thou servest continually. Was he able to deliver thee from the lions? In other words, Daniel, are you alive? And then that beautiful music. Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. Formal greeting. O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel. My God, up in the third heaven, whom I have served since I was a tiny little boy in Jerusalem. My God sent his angel from heaven, and his angel has come down to the lion's den and shut the lions' mouths. The angel did that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. I was innocent of this whole thing. I didn't harm anybody. I wasn't angry at you. I wasn't trying in any way to bring disfavor upon you, O king. I was doing what I've been trained to do since I was a little boy. And my God recognized my devotion to him. And he sent the angels, and the angels shut the mouth of the lions. Can't you see the angel down there in the lion's den? Got this big lion, or straddle of the big lion, and there he is. He's got his hands right around his throat. That lion can't do a thing. Protected by God. Supernatural. When you read these stories in the Bible, they're actually accounts, true accounts. You'll notice every one of them always magnifies God Almighty. God always gets the glory. Daniel isn't getting the glory. King Darius isn't getting the glory. They always magnify God. And in our own individual lives, if everything we do, if it can actually, when it comes to the conclusion, be a magnification of God Almighty and glorify God, then that's the purpose of our lives. And this is substantiated in the book of Ecclesiastes. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. What's it all about? What is life about? What does life concern? How are we involved in life? What's the conclusion of the whole matter? Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man, for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing. Nobody gets away with anything. With every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be bad. Verse 23. What's going to happen? Well, we're going to have Daniel's enemies destroyed. And the king changes his mind in verse 23 through 28. Then the king was exceeding glad for Daniel. Oh, he was happy. Why? Well, he's happy that his friend didn't get killed. He didn't have that on his mind. He wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night out of a sound sleep and see Daniel in the lion's den struggling, fighting with the lions, trying to save his life. No, Daniel's free now. So then the king was exceeding glad in verse 25 and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he had believed in his God. Faith. F-A-I-T-H. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Daniel had faith in God. Daniel had the same kind of faith that Abraham had when Abraham took his son Isaac up the mountain to offer him a sacrifice. Long about the 22nd chapter, 21st chapter, somewhere there in the book of Genesis, Abraham had the faith to believe that if he did take the life of his boy, Isaac, God would actually raise that corpse up again and bring him back to life. Daniel had that kind of faith. That's the kind of faith that God wants us to have. God wants us to have strong faith, believing faith, trusting faith, the faith to have ability to move mountains. That's the kind of faith. Because he believed in his God. Verse 24. Then the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Now what happened here? The king made another law. Doesn't say so, but the king passed another law. The law that he passed before Daniel went in the lion's den, he was sorry for that. But God delivered Daniel, and he also delivered the king. So now the king is angry, so he makes another law, and he has all of these people put in the lion's den. Their children, their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and break all their bones in pieces. or ever they came at the bottom of the den. As they threw them in the lion's den, the lions caught them and chewed them and bit them and broke their bones, and they died, screaming, begging for mercy. Verse 25, then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages. He's going to give another law now. He would do well at Sacramento, this fellow would. Or even Washington. We don't have enough laws. We only have about 5 million laws on the books now anyhow. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion, now God's going to get the glory out of this whole thing. Watch, here it is. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. I want everybody in my kingdom to know that Daniel's God is a God of deliverance. They tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he, that God that Daniel worships, he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. And this phrase should be for everlasting, unto everlasting. Verse 27, he delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
You have heard Dr. Howard C. Estep present 2 more Bible studies from the book of Daniel, chapters 5 and 6. This series of Bible studies from the book of Daniel continues on the 4th cassette tape.